Now then, it's Burnsy. Welcome to our regular Curiosity podcast, the CuriosityCast. Don't know why I said it so dramatically. Could be dramatic, you never know. Every episode we take questions asked by members of the public in Hull and try to get them the best answers from the very best brains in the city of Hull. Not all questions are about Hull. They can be about whatever you want to discover. We're picking up in this episode on some of the detail we got from Angus Young on the progress of Hull Maritime on one of our recent podcasts. One of the many major projects being undertaken by Hull City Council at the moment to discuss further detail on things like the Maritime Museum, the Arctic Corsair and the Spurn Lightship is Project Director of Hull Maritime, Gill Osgerby, joins us on the CuriosityCast. Nice to see you, Gill. Thank you very much for coming and talking to us.
No problem.
We'll start before we get to the questions. Give us the big picture of what you're in charge of and what's going on.
Yeah, so I have strategic oversight of the capital works and the community engagement work that happens as part of Hull Maritime. So people have seen the Maritime Museums at a critical point now, moving between the refurbishment work into the fit-out work. We're halfway through building a new visitor centre at the North End Shipyard for the Arctic Corsair, and associated landscaping, the return of the Scotch derrick crane, and that will become the new home for the Arctic Corsair. Then there's the ship works themselves, so on the Spurn Lightship and the Arctic Corsair restoration work that's been delivered by Dunstan Shipyard. And then we've got some new projects in the Maritime family, so that includes the public realm work to Humberdock Street, Princes Dock Street and High Street, which is part of National Highways funding, designated funds that we have to make improvements associated with the A63 works. But we've also got an opportunity to improve the visitor route and the messaging and the narrative around our maritime story within that refurbishment works that's taking place. South Blockhouse is a relatively new member of the project as well, of the programme. And the Guildhall Time Ball. So that's sort of family of projects. And of course, the massive refurbishment of Queen's Gardens that's currently on site.
Okay. We'll come to more on that. I have a feeling you're almost like somebody in a Greek restaurant spinning lots of plates.
It does feel like that sometimes, yeah.
Is it? Yeah.
I'm very lucky in that I get involved in so many amazing projects, but you're right. It's a very, very busy team, making a lot of very critical decisions day in, day out. So yeah, I do feel privileged to do it, but yeah, you're right. Sometimes there's quite a busy periods at times that we're keeping the plate spinning.
Which is the one that's keeping you awake at night?
They all take their turns, to be honest. It's probably like children, when you've got one that's sort of, coasting along and then doing fine and then, hit a little bit of a hurdle. But that's projects. Projects always have elements that are more challenging in testing. But I also weirdly quite like those times because, I suppose that's why you become a project manager in the first place. It's not going to be straightforward. And I like the challenge of overcoming those situations. So they all take their turns. I don't think there's, at the same time, they're all a real privilege. And sometimes I was in the Maritime Museum literally this morning, taking some colleagues around. And those are times where you go around and really remind yourself why you're doing it, because it just looks incredible. It's such a beautiful building and it's ready now for that next stage of the interpretation fit out. And the building shines. It's just so stunning. And even though we've had some real head scratching times and some challenges, it is all worth it just to see just how amazing it looks.
Okay. When people go in and eventually get in, will they all go, wow?
I really, really hope so, but I'm also certain that they will. Literally from colleagues taking them around with literally empty shells of rooms that we've got. I mean, all the colour schemes are there now, but there's nothing in them. They're empty rooms. And even at that, people are absolutely gobsmacked, especially when you walk in the courtroom and the new atrium. They are just breathtaking.
The photos I've seen
this
of the
is
rooms,
producer Dave, by the way.
He seems ashamed to spoil them with exhibits. They do look absolutely stunning, don't they?
Yeah, that's part of the whole thing, is that it's a Grade 2 star listed building. It was never built to be a museum. It was built to be a dock office. So it's not designed to be a museum. But we've been able to make it much more user-friendly, much more better for the audience in terms of anybody that's in a wheelchair now has much more equitable access. That's been absolutely critical. But also opening up the atrium so that you can see the architecture of the building more. You can see that it's a triangular shaped building. You have this feeling in the atrium that was originally the internal courtyard. It's still got that rough brickwork that's been painted, but you can see that it's had a history in that section of the building. Another thing that when we've taken some people around, they can't believe how much more outward facing the museum is. I think before the museum was very much looking at the exhibits and looking at and inward facing. Now we're really celebrating the views that you can see from the windows looking out as well. So the dome has this new spiral staircase that you can walk up and you can see this amazing view over Queen Victoria Square, but also over the roof line of the building. So all of that really ornate detail that's at the top of the roof line that you can only see from street level in, small detail. Is it much better closer up because you're able to look down on it. And then even the plant in the building, like the amount of plant and air handling to create quality exhibition space, you can see all of that from the dome. And then you've got this amazing view over Queen's Gardens, the length of Queen's Gardens and of the Guildhall Time Ball. So it's about making the museum more accessible, but also creating new experiences. So that whole of the top floor was never accessed by the public. It was storage space and office space for the museum staff. And so there's a whole new floor to experience. It means that we've been able to introduce new displays in different ways, and it has let the building shine.
So when will we be going, wow? I promise I'll get to the questions coming in. So when do we all go through the door and go, oh, wow?
Yeah, we're working to 2026 now, so spring 26.
Has that gone back then?
Yeah, there's quite a few issues that we came across in the building due to not being able to survey some elements until we actually had the contractor on site. So, for example, the lift shaft, the old lift shaft was in there, but we couldn't get to the fabric of the building behind the lift shaft until that had been removed. When we removed it, we then found out that the whole of the lift shaft from the basement all the way to the top floor had been sprayed with asbestos. So it wasn't even, we had no idea it was there because there was no way to survey it until the contractor was physically able to take the lift shaft out. So that then created a section of the building that couldn't be worked on other than the asbestos company, and it took them nearly 4 months to remove that. And that's just one element. The roof work again was considerable, and again due to areas that we couldn't survey before we actually had a contractor on site and had it all scaffolded, and then it really uncovers some of these problems. So it was extra on site, but that's because it's an old building. You always come across stuff that's unexpected, but now we're at this brilliant stage now that it is looking fantastic and ready for Marcon to start with a fit-out contract.
There's one of those plates spinning. We've just got evidence of that. Yeah. Is Angus in HU5, and I don't see the background to this, so I don't know whether it's our Angus. Is everything on track? Everything else on track?
Yes, the Nessie building, Northern Shipyard building, visitor centre, that's passive house standard, so that's quite challenging in itself because it's one of the first of its kind. It's incredibly unusual to make a zero carbon visitor centre. So a lot of passive house standard buildings are housing developments. So this is quite unusual what we're doing. We've passed the first 2 air tests, so there's a lot of very technical science behind it, but effectively it's about the passage of air inside and outside the building. It's like
an episode of Grand Designs with Kevin McLeod. I've seen
really
that episode, I think, with a passive house. It's hugely complicated.
It is, and there's a pressure test that they have to do inside and outside, and it's passed both of those, which is critical. It's a really big...
Why have you done that? You've made life more difficult for yourselves and presumably more costly.
It is.
Are you just all showing off?
Anyway, it's about Hull deserves to have these buildings that are of pushing boundaries and trying, to really put our marker. Why don't we deserve a passive house visitor attraction as much as any other city? And I think it's about doing the right thing in terms of the environment. It's going to be an incredibly ecological building in terms of running it, but also it's about putting us on the map. This is going to be, national standard news when it happens and opens because it's so unusual. And this project is about pushing boundaries and really shouting about just how fabulous Hull is as well.
Can I just say I'm very impressed with that answer? I like it. I'm thinking we like that. We like national and world interest in the area. Ian, in HU15, which is Brough areas, will everything continue to be free to visit?
Yes, it will. Yeah, we've worked very hard on that. It's part of, in the lottery bid for the funding for the project, it has always been said that it will be free, and it's something that we don't plan to change.
That's very good, because that must be tough. Tough for councils when money's tight.
Yeah, it is, and it's a national, question in the museum sector of how to make them still free to access, but keep up the quality in ever more challenging economic circumstances. But yeah, it's absolutely. We work really closely with HCAL, Hull Culture and Leisure, who operate the museums and galleries, to make sure that we're able to keep them free to access.
Joanne's on Hessel Road, HU3, and I suspect I could be wrong. There may be people involved in the trawler industry in history, because she asked this question: will the Arctic Corsair still have the guided tours by former trawlermen? Yes,
yeah. So we work really closely with the volunteers in the refurbishment as well. So they've been to Dunstan's on several times that we've taken them and got their opinion really on what we're doing, and they've pulled us up on a few bits, but being very honest in a great way. It was a proactive, decision that we wanted them there to see, not just to get involved at the end of the project, but involved throughout. And they've really been a critical friend to us to make sure that what we're doing is right, and is it sensitive, and is it appropriate. And so they've advised us, at several points through the refurbishment work. So yes, they'll be a critical part of the experience, and we absolutely have made sure that they're part of the plans. Then another thing is having a visitor centre next to the Corsair means that you can introduce some of these stories on the land side first. So there's an exhibition space that then sort of introduces you to the trawling industry, to the Corsair, to its importance to Hull and its development, and then you get to board the ship, and that's that extra element that really reinforces that narrative between not just about refurbishing a ship. It's not just about that. It's about really reinforcing the story in so many different levels, in terms of the artwork that we have, bespoke artwork that's been introduced, interpretation panels that lead you between the Maritime Museum, through Queen's Gardens, through the college site to the Arctic Corsair, all of that reinforcing that story, not just within the exhibitions, but actually in the streetscape, and also in the way that we've reinforced it in terms of technology. That means we've got QR codes that people can gain extra information as they're following the route. So it's layered. We've made sure that you can go to the museum, the Maritime Museum, and then come out to Queen's Gardens. And what's really been needed in Queen's Gardens is telling the story of the dock there, but the fact that it was this massive extent of water, and then how that links into bespoke pieces of artwork like the Scrimshaw Steps, which are taken from high resolution photographs of the actual Scrimshaw collection. They've been integrated within the steps, so you get to learn about that. There's a beautiful piece of artwork from Heinrich and Palmer, who did Ship of the Gods in 2017. There's 6 images that lead your eye down Guildhall Road, make you want to then walk to the Arctic Corsair. Then you get there and you have this interpretation, orientation centre that tells you all about the trawling industry, and then you get to board the ship. And then from there, there's an opportunity to go and visit all these other different elements like the South Blockhouse, and then walk around back to the Maritime Museum past the spare night ship.
All beautifully planned. We'll come to the Queen's Gardens project probably on the next question. We've got a question about a dog and a polar bear coming up as well on the Curiosity Cast. This is the Curiosity Cast from Curiosity. We're with somebody who's bringing the past into the present and taking it into the future for Hull. I've just made that up. I'm really pleased with it. You don't have to applaud if you're at home or listening when you're driving. Don't applaud when you're driving. I've got one question personally just going on the back of the Arctic Corsair and what's going on there, because I was sort of heavily involved in giving a bit of publicity to the headscarf revolutionaries. Is there a place for them?
Yes.
Yes.
In the Maritime Museum, they have a section
Is there anything for a statue or anything like that? What's the council's sort of view on it at the moment?
We've been working with the group that have been raising funds for this. So we meet with them regularly. They keep us up to date. We actually funded their community consultation. So we put some money in as part of our Hull Maritime grant scheme for them to consult the public on what they would like to see. So we do really regularly meet with them. And support them in what they're doing.
Okay, so it's ongoing, and hopefully there'll be something that'll work. Excellent, because personally I think it needs to happen. Tim in HU4 in West Hull is watching the pennies. In fact, he's watching the pounds, I think. Is there a cap on how much more expensive Queen's Gardens can get? Because it's gone over budget, hasn't it?
There's two sides to that. There's the actual scope of works has increased significantly. So originally the scope of works for Queen's Gardens was literally Guildhall Road and dealing with the failing boundary walls on that side. But then actually that then really highlighted the poor quality of Hull city centre's, primary a green space. It's the green space of the city. And actually, the more we looked at it, the more it was evident that it wasn't just Guildhall Road's boundary walls that were failing. It was actually all of them surrounding them. So there has been an increase in scope. There's also a change in some legislation. So, for example, originally when we developed Queen's Gardens plans, we only had to replant 2 trees for every 1 felled. That increased to 3 for 1, which obviously you support and is a positive thing. But that then obviously creates additional cost, because it's not just about, you can't just plonk a tree anywhere. And we didn't want to. We wanted to replant semi-mature trees in really good locations that give them the best chance for survival. And so finding sites that requires means that we've done it properly, really. And that means that some of those elements have gone up in cost. There's also, the pandemic had a huge impact on, we developed this scheme pre-pandemic. The pandemic came in and changed the economic climate for construction across the world, to be honest, but the UK construction industry has changed significantly in that time. That's had a direct impact on cost. And the problem with Queen's Gardens is it's so big, the space is enormous. So when you multiply 1 paving slab that has gone up 25%, when you multiply that over the thousands that you need, that has a direct impact on cost. So it's also about, actually, again, Hull deserves a fantastic green space in its city centre. We learned in the pandemic just how important green space is to people, and that's really something that we wanted to reinforce. And we didn't want to cut costs to turn it into, we could have just, done a light touch restoration, but actually what it really needs is a quality green space to celebrate that space, tell its story, make it somewhere that people really want to stop and spend time in. And it needed it. It wasn't a space that was well used, and I genuinely think that it will be at the end of this, because it's going to be really stunning. Okay,
it sounds a proper job, but how much over budget has it gone, and how are you going to fund it all?
Yeah, well, this project it's 100% council funded, so it's not like the other projects on Hull Maritime that have lottery funding. This one doesn't, but we've now, it was phased. There's an additional round of funding has been awarded by the council to the project, which was to deliver all of the scheme, because originally we'd phased it into phase 1 and 2. So phase 1's on site now, which includes Guildhall Road, the tree planting, and a section of the east boundary. But then the rest of the funding that's now comes delivers all of Queen's Gardens.
Okay. So it will happen. When will we be able to sort of walk through and experience it?
Yeah, the majority of the works will be finished by the end of next year.
Right, end of
25.
I'm trying to remember what year we're in now. 2025.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about the time ball in a minute, but from a time perspective, when's it projected all to be ready so people can come from outside Hull for a weekend or a week or whatever and see it?
Yeah, 2026.
Right.
So working to spring 26.
Okay, excellent. We know. Mentioning time. This from Sarah in HU16, Cottingham. Why is the time ball part of the Maritime project?
Well, we could talk here for probably 3 hours.
No, it's a half-hour podcast, Jill.
Yeah, on the importance of John Harris and longitude. So it was effectively John Harris developed how we effectively navigation through the use of longitude. A time ball works on ships being able to set longitude when they're at sea. So it is actually part of our maritime heritage and history. We're very unusual that we had one installed as late as we did in the 1900s, because really it was pretty old tech by then, but also quite a lot of prominent maritime locations had one, and I think Hull wanted its own one. So Greenwich had one, Liverpool had one. I think that at the time it was felt that Hull should have one. So it was, and then it's been an amazing project to be part of. It was really challenging. It's 60 meters up in the air. You had to have a real head for heights to go up that scaffolding tower. I did it once, and actually I'm not scared of heights, and it was not for the faint-hearted. The old time ball mechanism was removed, and then a new state-of-the-art one's been installed. So it goes rather than being effectively like a bike on its side. So it had a big wheel and a small wheel and a chain that went between the two. And then when they needed to stop the time ball, effectively the cogs would stop, and the chain would stop the cogs from turning and would stop the time ball. That was the old tech. But then we stripped all that out, and now it's got very powerful electromagnets that then stop the time ball, rise it, and then stop it at the bottom of the drop.
And can you see this from street level if you crane your neck skywards?
You can see the time ball rise up at 12:57. It goes up to the top of the of its pole, and then at 1 o'clock exactly, it drops to the bottom. So you can see that every day. It runs every day. And there's also an interpretation panel near in Hull College campus on the route that will take you between the North End Shipyard and across Queen's Garden. So there's a new interpretation panel that's probably been there about 4 weeks now, that people can actually stand on the street, read about the actual time ball and how it works, but then also watch it drop from that point. Okay,
right. Okay, I'll have to check that out. I mentioned a dog and a polar bear earlier, and this comes in from Eve in Hessel, my manor. Will the Maritime Museum still have Sirius the dog and the rampant polar bear?
Yeah, Eric the polar bear.
Eric.
Is in.
Not rampant.
The rampant is he's upright, isn't he?
Yeah, I've been in the polar bear. There's been a few rampant people in there, but that's a different story entirely. Anyway, Eric the polar bear and Sirius the dog.
Yeah, and the mermaid, and all of our key exhibits. We did so much consultation before in the development of the plans for the Maritime Museum. So we know which are the public's favourites, and Robin, our curator, has always been very protective of making sure that they're still accessible and that they're the things that draw people back and they want to come in and see them. So I remember my first day on this project when I was started on the job. It was the first items being moved out of the museum, and we did a press call, and one of the first things I saw was Eric being boxed up and this big lid being slid on top of a polar bear. And I thought, well, if this is what the job involves, then I'm in. This sounds fun. Let's go for it.
I think somebody else asked about the whale song.
Yeah, I've got it. I'm jumping around the questions, Dave.
Sure. Because that's all part of the same thing, isn't it?
Emma wants to know about whale song. Is it staying in the Maritime Museum?
Yeah, there's actually quite a special element to that. So the whale skeleton.
Great, I love that. I always loved that whale song. I used to go in specifically to listen to it. I loved it.
Right.
It's great.
The whale skeleton that was it looked a bit beached in the main gallery there. It's now had a full refurbishment, so it's going to be animated. So its tail goes right up to the ceiling.
Oh.
It's in a special box podium that means that it's got a big dome inside the whale's tummy, so you can climb underneath it and pop up in the whale's tummy and then hear whale sound within the tummy.
Okay.
It's cool, isn't it?
You'll be doing
that. Keep me out.
Try not and get in the way of everybody on the first day as you try to get the front of the queue.
I hope there's room for the larger gentleman. That's all I'm saying.
It's a whale. It's got a big tummy.
Also within that gallery, because it's a juvenile right whale that we have in our collection, and it's obviously a full adult version is longer than the length of that gallery. So that's going to be projected onto the ceiling. So you can actually see the comparison of our whale skeleton to actually a full grown whale. And that'll be projected and sort of swim across the ceiling in that gallery space.
We've got a question from Eddie in HU14 in the West Hull Villages. And I don't know whether there's a typo in here or there's a word missing, but the question is, what is, I presume it's what is being done to the street linking the maritime sites, or the streets linking the maritime. You've touched on it.
Yeah, so wayfinding and helping people navigate really between the sites is critical. So we've got some interpretation panels that are going in, but the difference with ours is instead of having just text and photographs, which is important, we've introduced artwork into them as well. So, for example, as you look down Guildhall Road from the Maritime Museum, drawing you to Northern Shipyard, there's 6 beautiful pieces of sort of graphic artwork that's being created that draw you down the street. But then on the opposite return side is a traditional interpretation panel with information on Queen's Gardens and some photographs to support that. So that's one element. We also have wayfinding markers. We've had some elements of the maritime collection digitally scanned, and then they've been CNC cut out of Carrara marble, and they're being inlaid on top of stones, and they're exactly the same shape profile as the original mooring bollards around Queen's Gardens. We've also got opportunity to do more of those around the loop, because a loop effectively goes from the Maritime Museum, Queen's Gardens, Northern Shipyard, through the Old Town to South Block House, around Humber Street, back up to the marina where you'll see Spurn Lightship, and then back up to the Maritime Museum.
I'm pleased because people can wave to Dead Bod, which I was going to ask you about Dead Bod. So Dead Bod will be, because it's very dear to my heart, Dead Bod, so it'll be part of it because people will pass it. Yes?
Yeah, you're right.
And it'll get a mention. Whew, thank goodness. I'm pleased about that. This is a question from me before we get to Heidi's question. How many, is it projected as to how many extra people this will bring into Hull? Because this is,
I think that's,
to generate tourist business, one of the things.
You're right. I think the key thing is that you won't be able to do all of these in a day.
No.
And it will turn Hull potentially into, and hopefully into, a weekend away destination. Mm-hmm. To do the Maritime Museum properly, you'll need more than a day. There's 3 full floors of exhibits there now. It was hard before to do it all in one day, but certainly with an extra floor. You've got a new visitor attraction at North End Shipyard, all of the Spurn Lightship and the Arctic Corsair, whereas they were more limited visiting times, they'll be much more extended. So there'll be a lot more opportunity for people to actually visit and engage with each of these sites.
Has somebody in the council projected how many visitors you would hope then?
Yeah, there is on each. It's all modelled effectively, because there's a model for the first year when visitor numbers will skyrocket because everybody wants to come, and then it's
an extra 250,000, an extra 100.
Yes,
is it
exactly right? 250,000.
First thing I've got right all day.
You're in the wrong trade.
An extra 250,000 people to Hull, and all the attendant spend in hotels and bars and restaurants.
Yeah, and what we're doing, I go to a few conferences in terms of the heritage sector, and what we're doing is really unusual in terms of the scale of it. There's so many people have come up to me wanting to know what's happening after I've done a few presentations on the project, and everyone's heard of what we're doing in Hull. This is not something that's just happening locally. Within the museum sector itself, it's really unusual, and they're quite envious of the amount of money that we've got to do it, but to do it properly and to do it on the scale that we're doing. This is the biggest lottery grant in the North region that they've ever given, and that really shines a light on just how important this project is. But it's also, again, Hull is such a fantastic place, and again, this is exactly, it deserves it. It's a fantastic place for people to come and visit, and so many people, we've got a lot of consultants that are involved in this project, obviously, and some of them aren't local, and when they come up the first time, you can see they automatically change their perspective on what Hull's about, because you do have to come here and see just how fabulous it is. And we've changed a lot of people's perspectives already, and we'll continue to do so through this project.
I've really enjoyed the chat in this episode. Time and Time Ball are rather against us. It's fascinating. I'm going to give you one more plate to spin. You don't have to answer it, but I love this from Heidi in HU10 in Willoughby, and I can see that you might have to do this. My kids call the Maritime Museum the Marmite Museum. Please, can we change the name to that? I think that's a great place. I don't think any of this will be Marmite. I think everybody will love it. The the project director of Hull Maritime, Gill Osgerby, thank you very much for your time. You've been listening to the CuriosityCast. Remember, you can ask questions, seek answers on the Curiosity website, www.curiosityhull.co.uk, or follow and befriend us on all the socials where we're Curiosity Hull on all the main feeds. We'll be back very soon with more quality answers to whatever question you'd like to ask.